Iran's supreme leader posting just moments ago, his nation, quote, will not surrender to anyone's violation.
It's quite so very sad how war is becoming a norm amongst humanity. And as the devastating conflict between Israel and Iran intensifies, many in the Black community find themselves drawn into supporting one side or the other.
My people, melanated dominant people, it's amazing to me how we're so easily roped into somebody else's fight, but we don't open up closet doors and start looking at who we run into they fight.
In every war, the world comes calling for Black people to take a stand, to post a hashtag, to pick a side. But what if neither side ever stood with us? Right now, the world is buzzing about Israel versus Iran. Some say it's about freedom. Others say it's about faith. But before you choose who the good guys are, ask yourself, how do these nations treat people who look just like you? Like me? Like us? Because when you strip away the politics, the real question becomes chillingly simple. Do Black lives matter in their world? Suffice it to say that this isn't about politics, religion, or global alliances. It is about reality. Because while the world debates who's right or wrong, Black people remain at the bottom of the conversation, often mistreated, ignored, or exploited by both sides. In this video, we're not taking sides in a geopolitical chess match, nor are we here to defend one flag over another. Rather, we are pulling back the curtain to expose the silent suffering of Black communities on both sides. Because if we're going to be asked to fight, to speak, to pick a side, we first need to look at how they treat us when we're not trending. So, let us dive into the overlooked, erased, and buried truth about what it means to be Black in Israel and in Iran. And trust me, it's not what the headlines are telling you. Before we continue, don't forget to support our works by hitting the thumb button, share with as many as you can to keep spreading our eye-opening Black narrative, and subscribe to Stay Tuned In for more revealing updates which center all around Black experience and truth. Now let us break this down, not chronologically, not politically, but human to human. Let us look at how Black communities live, struggle, resist, and are silenced side by side. In Israel, you're welcome, but you're not equal. Black people in Israel mostly fall into two categories. First, African asylum seekers, mainly from Sudan and Eritrea. Second, Ethiopian Jews, brought in under the promise of unity, only to be pushed into the margins. From the moment they arrive, whether fleeing war or fulfilling the Zionist dream, their Blackness marks them. They are stopped more by the police. They are placed in segregated schools. They face higher unemployment, lower pay, and routine housing discrimination. Even blood donations from Ethiopian Jews were secretly discarded by hospitals in the 1990s. Imagine risking your life for a country that won't even accept your blood. Now let's look at the other side of the coin. Iran. In Iran, we don't see you, so you don't exist. Afro-Iranians, primarily descendants of East African slaves, live mostly in the southern provinces, and while the government doesn't outright call them illegal, it is like they're invisible. There are no Black politicians, no national census tracking their population, no real representation in media, education, or state affairs. Even the word for Black, Sia, is often used as a slur. Another striking example to look at is the areas of law enforcement. In Israel, multiple young Ethiopian Israelis have died in confrontations with the police. Solomon Teka, 18, unarmed, gunned down in Haifa in 2019. Yehuda Biadga, suffering from mental illness, shot dead, 2019. A video of Demas Fekade, a uniformed Ethiopian IDF soldier being beaten by police, went viral, and still no justice. In response, Tel Aviv erupted in protests, But the Israeli government's response? Silence. Meanwhile, in Iran, black Iranians are not publicly brutalized. But that's not safety, it's invisibility. Many live in the poorest regions with limited access to jobs, healthcare, and political voice. And when they do speak up, they are met with censorship, suppression, or are simply ignored. And what about the areas of health and reproductive rights? In Israel, multiple Ethiopian women have testified that before they were allowed to immigrate, they were coerced into receiving birth control injections, Depo-Provera, without informed consent. Some were told outright, "You can't come to Israel unless you stop having children."
Did you know that Israel was giving Ethiopian women Depo-Provera shots? Because they didn't want them coming into Israel and having children. They were sterilizing black women.
Now that's not immigration. That is population control, rooted in racism. In Iran, healthcare access is deeply tied to geography and ethnicity. Many Afro-Iranians live in underdeveloped areas where clinics are underfunded, and their health outcomes are worse. But you won't hear about that, because official records don't even count them separately. While Israel discriminates loudly, Iran erases quietly. Where in Israel, black kids might get put in all black schools, in Iran they don't even get into the picture. In order to actually get the naked idea on how Africans are being treated by the Israelis and the Iranians, a careful look at the everyday life of blacks in each of these countries says it all. For nearly a year, Israel has been offering African migrants cash and the chance to go and live in what is supposed to be a safe haven in a third country. But the BBC in a recent interview spoke to two men who say that they were abandoned as soon as they got off the plane. One was immediately trafficked, the other left to fend for himself without papers. Adam, who was just 18 as at when he arrived in Israel in 2011, reported that attackers had burned down his home in Darfur at the height of the genocide, and he had spent his teenage years in a UN refugee camp in another part of Sudan. With no prospects in the camp and no sign of an end to the conflict in Darfur, he made his way north through Egypt and the lawless Sinai Peninsula to Israel. But Israel, which has approved fewer than 1% of asylum applications since it signed the UN Refugee Convention 6 decades ago, has not offered asylum to a single person from Sudan. It turned down Adam's application, and by October 2015, when he went to renew the temporary permit, allowing him to stay in the country, he was summoned to a detention center known as Holot, deep in the Negev desert. This was no surprise for Adam. As most Sudanese and Eritreans in Israel know, it's just a matter of time before they get the call to Holot. The government calls Holot an open stay center, but it's run by the prison service and rules are strict, including a nighttime curfew, which if broken, will land you in jail. It's in such an isolated area that there's very little to do and nowhere to go. A quick conversation with Adam and a group of his friends just outside the gates of Holot, where at that time they spent most of their day playing cards or snooker and eating and cooking in makeshift restaurants, made them disclose how they took turns to make the hour-long bus ride into the nearest town, Beersheba, where they bought food. The meals served in Holot were insufficient, they said, and contained little meat or protein. Most of the men there were young, in their 20s or early 30s. Some had been teachers, activists, or students in their own countries.
We are wasting our youth here.
Adam says.
If someone lives in Holot, they have no future. You find many people here who go crazy.
The comments made by Israel's top political and religious leaders in early March 2018 are also a dismal reminder of how little black lives matter in the country, and how African refugees remain in mortal danger, whether or not the government's plan to deport them is temporarily suspended. On March 17, 2018, one of Israel's two chief rabbis, Yitzhak Yosef, called black people monkeys, and the Hebrew equivalent of the N-word, in his weekly sermon. It is highly unlikely that Yosef will face any real repercussions for his racist comments. He was not demoted after saying in a similar sermon exactly 2 years ago that all non-Jews, Africans, Arabs, or otherwise, could only live in Israel if they agreed to serve the country's Jewish population. The government has already coerced more than a third of the African refugee community in Israel, over 20,000 souls, to return to Africa. Israeli journalists have revealed in recent months that the government's promises to secure status for them in Rwanda or Uganda were only a ruse, devised to deport them back into a stateless existence with their ostensible acquiescence. Social segregation in Israel has taken on a visible and painful form for many Africans, particularly asylum seekers and migrants from Eritrea and Sudan. These individuals, who fled war, persecution, or poverty, arrived in Israel hoping for safety and a new start. But instead of refuge, many have been met with rejection, racism, and public calls for their removal. In certain Israeli neighborhoods, particularly in South Tel Aviv, Black Africans are openly blamed for crime, poverty, and social problems. Politicians and citizens alike have called for them to be deported, and some protests have even included chants like "Africans out" or "Send them back to Africa." These sentiments are not isolated. They reflect a deep unease with Black presence in a country that defines its national identity primarily through Jewish ethnicity. And this raises a crucial question. Now that they're in need of external help to win the ongoing war, do they deserve our support? The lives of Black people in Iran, on the other hand, are marked by a quiet, often unspoken form of marginalization. While they are not openly attacked or subjected to the same level of racial violence seen in some parts of the world, they live with a constant awareness that they are seen as different. Many Afro-Iranians reside in the southern provinces, particularly around Hormozgan, where their presence stretches back generations, tracing their roots to East African slaves brought to the region centuries ago. Despite this deep historical connection, they remain largely invisible in the Iranian social fabric. They are rarely seen in national media, in government, or in positions of cultural influence. Their stories, struggles, and contributions are left out of mainstream conversations, as if their identity exists on the margins of Iranian life. In everyday interactions, Black Iranians face subtle forms of racism, curious stares, insensitive jokes, or assumptions about their origins. Even within local communities, lighter skin is often favored, and colorism quietly shapes social attitudes. For those who travel outside their southern communities into central or northern Iran, the sense of being othered grows stronger. They are often mistaken for foreigners, questioned about their presence, or stereotyped as poor or uneducated. African students and migrants who come to Iran for education or work report similar experiences. Many speak of being treated with suspicion, excluded from certain spaces, or constantly having to explain their identity and intentions. Though Iran does not have openly racist laws, there is little public conversation about race or Black identity. As a result, the bias that exists, whether in schools, workplaces, or daily life, often goes unchecked. In this silence, many Black Iranians grow up with a complex sense of belonging. They are Iranian by birth and culture, yet their skin tells a story the nation rarely acknowledges. Their lives are a quiet struggle to be seen, heard, and respected, not as guests or outsiders, but as an essential part of the country's past, present, and future. In both Iran and Israel, the experiences of Black immigrants is marked by systemic segregation, subtle in some cases, overt in others, but always rooted in deep racial and social biases. In Israel, Black immigrants, particularly asylum seekers from Eritrea and Sudan, face harsh realities from the moment they arrive. They are rarely seen as individuals fleeing war or persecution. Instead, they are labeled infiltrators, a term that strips them of humanity and frames them as threats. The Israeli government has repeatedly denied them refugee status, leaving thousands in legal limbo, unable to access basic rights like healthcare, stable work, or education for their children. These migrants are often forced to live in segregated areas like South Tel Aviv, where neglect, poverty, and public hostility define daily life. Protests against their presence, inflammatory political speeches, and discriminatory policies create an atmosphere of fear and exclusion. Many have been detained in centers like Holot, or face deportation to countries they've never known. Policies that show how deeply race and status intersect in Israel's immigration system. In Iran, the story is quite quiet, but no less troubling. Black migrants, often students or laborers from African nations, face racial prejudice wrapped in politeness or silence. They are viewed as outsiders, even after years of living, studying, or working in the country. Opportunities are limited, housing is difficult to secure, and they are often profiled by authorities or denied services. Unlike in Israel, their struggle is rarely discussed publicly, making their isolation even more profound. What links both nations is not just the segregation itself, but the refusal to fully recognize Black migrants as equal, deserving human beings. In systems shaped by ethno-national identity and racial hierarchy, the Black skin is often seen as incompatible with belonging. Whether through policy, media, or public perception, these immigrants are pushed to the margins, not because of what they've done, but because of who they are. And so Black people in both Israel and Iran continue to navigate immigration systems that don't just deny them opportunity, but question their very right to exist within those borders. And again, it leaves us with the question, are these people really worth fighting for? As the conflict between Israel and Iran captures the world's attention, many people, particularly across Africa and the global Black community, feel pressure to pick a side. Media narratives, political alliances, and religious connections often sway opinion. But before showing support for either nation, Black people must ask a critical question. How do these countries treat us? The answer, in both cases, reveals a history of marginalization, racism, and exclusion that cannot be ignored. In Israel, the treatment of Black people, especially African migrants from Eritrea and Sudan, is defined by systemic racial segregation. These individuals who fled war, dictatorship, and poverty sought asylum in Israel with hopes of safety and opportunity. Instead, they were labeled infiltrators, a term that criminalizes their existence and paints them as threats rather than humans in need. Few, if any, of these asylum seekers are granted refugee status. Many live in limbo, unable to work legally or access proper healthcare or education. The Israeli government has detained them in isolated facilities and even attempted to deport them to third countries, often without guaranteeing their safety. In neighborhoods like South Tel Aviv, Black migrants are segregated, over-policed, and blamed for social decline. They face racist attacks, hate speech, and open calls for expulsion, even from elected officials. In Iran, the experience is less visible, but just as real. Black people in Iran, whether Afro-Iranians or African migrants, exist on the fringes of society. Afro-Iranians, mainly living in the South, are descendants of Africans brought centuries ago through the Indian Ocean slave trade. Despite being Iranian by birth and culture, they are socially invisible. Their contributions are overlooked, their identity erased from national discourse. Many experience colorism, stereotypes, and exclusion from political and cultural life. Black migrants, often students or laborers from African nations, face racial prejudice wrapped in politeness or silence. They are viewed as outsiders, even after years of living, studying, or working in the country. Opportunities are limited, housing is difficult to secure, and they are often profiled by authorities or denied services. Unlike in Israel, their struggle is rarely discussed publicly, making their isolation even more profound. What links both nations is not just the segregation itself, but the refusal to fully recognize Black migrants as equal, deserving human beings. In systems shaped by ethno-national identity and racial hierarchy, the Black skin is often seen as incompatible with belonging. Whether through policy, media, or public perception, these immigrants are pushed to the margins, not because of what they've done, but because of who they are. And so, Black people in both Israel and Iran continue to navigate immigration systems that don't just deny them opportunity, but question their very right to exist within those borders. And again, it leaves us with the question, are these people really worth fighting for? The law enforcement functions in Iran aren't any better. They are under a tightly controlled, often authoritarian system. But for Black people, that control is sharpened by racial bias and quiet exclusion. Whether they are African students, migrant workers, or long-term residents, Black individuals in Iran often face policing that is not just strict, but discriminatory. From the moment they walk the streets, their visibility becomes their vulnerability. With darker skin making them stand out in a largely homogeneous society, Black people are frequently subjected to police stops, questions, and demands for documentation. These encounters are not driven by law-breaking, but by appearance. Being Black in Iran often means being seen first as suspicious, then as foreign, even when fully legal or contributing to society. Many report being spoken to harshly, treated with open disrespect, or assumed to be dishonest before any facts are known. And in a system with few protections against racial discrimination, there is little hope for recourse. If a Black person is mistreated, wrongly accused, or detained, their chances of receiving fair treatment through the legal system are slim. There are no clear anti-racism laws to protect them, and very few voices in power speak on their behalf. Even those who come legally, students studying in Iranian universities or workers with contracts, often find themselves navigating a climate where their presence is tolerated at best and rejected at worst. They're denied housing by landlords, questioned more aggressively by police, and excluded from spaces where decisions are made. This policing is not always loud, but it is deeply felt. It sends a message that Black lives, no matter their reason for being in Iran, are less trusted, less protected, and more easily dismissed. In a country where state violence and control are already part of daily life, being Black adds another layer of fear, of judgment, and of isolation. And because this racism is rarely spoken of publicly, it continues unchecked, hidden behind bureaucracy and silence. For Black people in Iran, the law does not always serve justice. It too often reinforces separation. And as incidents of police violence towards African Americans have received increased exposure and media attention in recent months, Iran has sought to capitalize on the controversy and claim moral superiority over its rivals in Washington. In April, Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei accused the U.S. of tyrannizing its African American citizens, saying, "Black people in the U.S. are oppressed, disrespected, and humiliated." Khamenei was referring to the demonstrations and unrest in U.S. cities against perceived racism in local police departments. In a series of tweets in December, Khamenei disparaged the United States' treatment of Native Americans and African Americans, highlighting the events in Ferguson, Missouri, and the Wounded Knee incident of 1890, a battle between the U.S. government and Native American forces that ended in the massacre of hundreds of Native American non-combatants, including women and children. Was it not colonialists who killed Native Americans and enslaved millions of Africans? Are these American values? The Supreme Leader tweeted at the time. Despite these freedom talks from the Iran leader, freedom of speech is severely limited in Iran. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and YouTube are all banned in the country. A 2009 protest movement claiming voter fraud in the re-election of then-President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was met with an iron fist, with thousands arrested and dozens killed by authorities. It's really wild how most Iranians are all about fighting racism globally, but would turn a blind eye when it comes to the struggles faced by blacks in Iran. They're more concerned with being seen as heroes on the world stage than actually doing the real work to uplift their own marginalized communities. While in Israel, clashes have broken out most especially in Jerusalem, as more than 1,000 Ethiopian Israelis staged several protests, demanding an investigation into alleged police racism and violence. In one of such protests, at least 13 people were injured, and 2 police officers and 5 protesters were taken to hospital. In most reports, the police said the crowd hurled stones and bottles, with police using anti-riot measures to keep them at bay, including tear gas and stun grenades. The protests reportedly started outside the city's police headquarters, with demonstrators blocking off one of the city's main traffic arteries and the light rail service. Protesters waved banners reading, "Stop police brutality, stop racism," and "Today it's him, tomorrow it's you." They then marched towards the residence of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, where they also blocked the road before being stopped by a large number of police equipped with water cannons. "Enough of racism," they chanted, some of them waving Israeli flags, others holding up the Ethiopian flag. "In Europe they kill Jews because they're Jews. Here they kill Jews for being black," read one placard. Jerusalem Police Chief Chico Edry said the police were aware of the stormy emotions gripping the Ethiopian community, but called for everyone to act with restraint. The protest was sparked by a series of incidents involving alleged racism and police brutality against members of the Ethiopian Jewish community. In April 2015, footage emerged of 2 police officers violently beating an Ethiopian soldier in uniform, sparking a wave of anger within the community. Netanyahu called for calm and pledged to take action against those shown in the footage. He said in a statement,
"I strongly condemn the beating of the Ethiopian IDF soldier, and those responsible will be held accountable. However, no one is allowed to take the law into their own hands."
Speaking to Channel 10 television, Internal Security Minister Yitzhak Aharonovich said those shown in the video had brought shame on the ranks of the police. Israel's National Police Chief Yohanan Danino also pledged a crackdown following the emergence of the footage, saying that the police would not tolerate such unacceptable behavior. He also pledged to set up a team to investigate the community's grievances, but it is well known that these leaders will only come out to make promises, but nothing changes. They show up, make statements, and disappear. Meanwhile, the problems stay the same. It's a cycle of empty words that leaves people feeling frustrated and ignored. The fatal police shooting of an unarmed Ethiopian Israeli, 18-year-old Solomon Teka, on June 30th in the northern city of Haifa is a resounding instance of police brutality that sparked a wave of demonstrations across Israel. As a result, Tel Aviv saw days of protests against police brutality against blacks led by Ethiopian Israeli activists like Avi Yalu, who had written in the foreword,
"Here's what I don't want. I don't want an apology. An apology won't bring back Solomon. What we want now is to prevent the next murder, the next senseless killing. For that to happen, we need justice."
Efrat Yardeh, a board member of NIF grantee, the Association of Ethiopian Jews, had written in Haaretz,
"How many more young Ethiopian Israelis need to die from police violence for the Israeli public to wake up, to understand that Teka's skin color is the reason why it was so easy for a police officer to shoot him?"
For days, thousands of mostly young protesters blocked major roads in Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Jerusalem, clashing with police and demanding accountability. Dozens were injured, and more than 100 were arrested. Following the Jewish week-long mourning period of Shiva, protests resumed a week later when about 1,000 demonstrators gathered in Tel Aviv to march from Azrieli Junction to Rabin Square. Demonstrators chanted and sang. Many held signs bearing slogans like, Mother, don't let me be the next victim. Our lives are not worthless, and black lives matter. While Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu offered his sympathies as usual and said all of Israel is with the Ethiopian community, activists and others contend that Tekka's death is the result of a larger systemic issue that words alone cannot resolve.
We struggle against not only the killing, it's more deep, it's about racism.
That was Aviyalu again.
It's difficult to explain what it means to be a black person in Israel.
Tekka's death has reignited calls to end what many in the Ethiopian-Israeli community see as institutional racism and discriminatory policing. It has also highlighted the painful history of the Ethiopian experience in Israel and sparked a conversation about the complex nature of race and collective identity in a largely segregated society. After a rabbinic ruling declared Ethiopian Jews direct descendants from the biblical tribe of Dan, Israel launched 2 clandestine airlift missions in the 1980s and 90s to bring tens of thousands of Ethiopian Jews to Israel. Through Operation Solomon in 1991, Israel airlifted 14,000 Ethiopian Jews within 36 hours. While Israelis hailed the airlift as a massive success, Ethiopians have struggled ever since to gain acceptance and social and economic security, and have been frequently mistreated by the police. Israel's Internal Investigations Department confirmed during that period that the off-duty police officer who shot and killed Tekka fired at the ground, and the bullet ricocheted into Tekka. Officials said they are not inclined to charge the officer, whose identity is being withheld, with manslaughter, but instead with a disciplinary offense. He was released from custody and put under house arrest a day after the incident. Ziva Reuven Kabeda, an Ethiopian-Israeli activist and psychodrama therapist, is the mother of 2 children in Netanya. In the wake of Tekka's death, she says she is not sure how to speak to her children about the police.
I'm asking myself, what kind of education and preparation am I giving them?
She says, speaking through a translator.
When they go outside, should I say, watch out for strangers and watch out for police? That doesn't seem right because the police are also there to protect you.
David Ratner, a senior researcher at the Israeli Ministry of Education and a sociologist specializing in the Ethiopian-Israeli community, says police brutality and racial profiling are among the most pressing concerns for Ethiopian Israelis right now. According to data analyzed by the Association of Ethiopian Jews, Ethiopian Israelis are targeted by police at higher rates than other Jewish Israelis.
They are stopped on a daily basis, especially the young adolescent males.
Ratner, also a black Israeli, said,
They are questioned by police, and they can end up with anything from a criminal file opened for them up to being beaten, like the tragic case of Yosef Salamsa.
In 2014, 2 policemen tasered 22-year-old Yosef Salamsa and left him outside a police station in the northern city of Zikron Yaakov. A few months later, Salamsa was found dead, having apparently taken his own life. The criminal investigation against the police was eventually closed. Some weeks before the previous round of Ethiopian-Israeli protests against police violence erupted in 2015, when 2 police officers assaulted an Ethiopian soldier, Damas Picado, in uniform in the Tel Aviv suburb of Holon. The incident, which appeared to have been unprovoked, was caught on film. The offending officer was later fired, and the police chief announced he would establish a council of police and Ethiopian community leaders to improve relations. While ceasing racial profiling within the police force is a top policy priority for Yalu, he says the disappearance of Ethiopian-Israeli Avra Mengistu remains for him the most devastating manifestation of unequal care, concern, and allocation of national resources. In 2012, Mengistu, who was 28 at the time of his disappearance and suffering from mental illness, crossed the border into Gaza. He was captured and remains, presumably, imprisoned by Hamas.
We talk about racism against our community, and I want to remind everyone about our brother in Gaza. No one talks about it. We need to bring them home.
By contrast, when Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit was captured and held by Hamas militants in a border raid in 2006, there was a national outcry. Then Interior Minister Ronnie Bar-On warned Hamas on national radio that the sky will fall on them if Shalit was harmed or killed. He was released in a prisoner exchange in 2011. Ethiopian Israelis have also faced other forms of discrimination. In the mid-1990s, Ethiopians were outraged to discover Israel was throwing away their donated blood for fear it might be HIV positive. And in 2012, reports emerged that women immigrating from Ethiopia were told by authorities they would be denied entry unless they agreed to be injected with Depo-Provera, a long-acting birth control drug. Additionally, the rates of domestic violence, divorce, and suicide are higher for Ethiopian Israelis compared to other sectors of society. There are significant gaps in employment and income rates between Ethiopian Israelis and the general Jewish population, and a significant percentage of Ethiopian Israelis have comparatively little or no formal education. As we bring this video to an end, it's worth noting that Black communities around the world must begin to view global politics through the lens of self-respect and lived experience. And when neither side sees you, protects you, or uplifts you, the most powerful choice you can make is to stand for yourself, not as a tool in someone else's war, but as a people whose value cannot be negotiated. Because from Haiti to Libya, Ukraine to Palestine, the pattern is clear. We are weaponized in war and forgotten in rebuilding. If Israel and Iran both claim to fight for justice, where is that justice for their Black residents? If they claim to care about equality, why do their Black populations face the worst outcomes in housing, education, health, and dignity? If they ask for our solidarity, where then was theirs when our children were being shot, sterilized, or silenced? This isn't about being anti-Israel or anti-Iran. It's about being pro-Black everywhere. And before you let anyone tell you which side to stand on, make sure they ever stood for you. We showed up for the world, but who showed up for us? Black people have always stood up for justice, from Selma to Soweto, from Malcolm X in Ghana to Angela Davis in Palestine, from the anti-apartheid rallies in Harlem to Black Lives Matter protests across Paris and London. We show up, we march, we donate, we speak, we sacrifice. Because deep in our bones, we understand injustice. We've lived it, generationally, globally. So when the world cries out, Black people often answer, but here's the uncomfortable truth. The world rarely shows up for us in return. That brings us to the end of yet another sobering content. And if the message conveyed resonated with you, then hit the thumb up button to support our Black-centered storytelling. Share with as many people as you can reach. Let's make this part of the global conversation. And better still, subscribe to stay tuned into our channel so that you don't miss out on any updates in the future. We are happy to have you here with us on this journey. Thank you for watching.